a really tough question, by the way. I would define design as a way of helping us not necessarily navigate from a problem to a solution, but rather from the understanding of a situation towards finding ways to intervene, to change it. And the interesting thing is that it's not necessarily a linear thing that we go from one state to the other, but also our understanding of how we can transform it will affect, go back and change how we understand the situation we're changing. So it's kind of like this going back and forth between understanding and transforming or intervening, that I would say it's the scope of design. So it's not just in one side or the other. And going to the second part of the question around the impact of service design in particular, I see the impact of service design not just as the orchestration of individual touch points in an experience that happen that a certain organization has with a person or a user or a community. But I'm more interested in service design acting as a way of transforming an organization from the inside so that it can provide more user-centered, more people-centered, more life-centered ways of delivering value or of co-creating value with people. So I like to think of it not just as designing individual touch points or their relationship, but also helping an organization become more life-centered, more people-centered. So the ever pressing question of service design measuring, which is probably the third chapter after service design thinking and doing, probably should be something around how we actually measure the impact of what we do. I'm pretty sure there's no easy answer nor simple answer, and it really depends on the context we're working with. And I can maybe here go back to some of my past experiences. For instance, working in government, I used to be a service designer working at the Argentinian government, at the Public Innovation Lab at the federal level, where we help other areas of government to create more citizen-centered public services and policy. And there oftentimes we work with services, but also we work with teams delivering those services. So I was not directly in charge of the team delivering the service, but was a more outside role. And there we would not only oftentimes it was not possible to measure the direct changes that a service would have over time, but we would be looking for what we called signs of success in the teams we were working with. And those signs of success could be things such as using prototyping tools to prototype policy or regulations or things like that, or like the way they approach users. So we oftentimes would look for those signs of success in the ways those teams would work in different ways, because it was very difficult to measure end-to-end the transformation of the services themselves. So sometimes we had to use this proxy way of measuring how the teams delivering those or working with those services change with time. So maybe that's the closest I could do from my own personal experience. Thinking about the transformation of service design is probably one of the things that I am more interested in, because I train designers or next generation of designers. So I have to think about these questions. It's not just a theoretical question for me. It's at the very core of what I do, is understanding how the discipline will change, because the people I'm training today will be working 2030s and beyond. Well, entering a job market then. So these are considerations we have to think about. And going directly to your question of how the discipline will change, I don't know. Nobody knows for sure how will it change, but there are a few things that I think we can reflect on. I think one of it, and we are seeing this on conversations on the discipline at different levels, is this more systemic turn of our discipline, which I think is related to a bit understanding that whether we choose to see it or not, the impact of the experiences and services we design are very real and oftentimes in unintended ways. We've seen it with things such as the sharing economy or things like that we are now like revisiting, that might have been a very good experience from the point of view of a particular user, but very bad for communities, for workers, for the environment, for other people involved. So I think in general, we are becoming a bit more of a mature discipline, which may not be the mainstream of the practice, but at least at some conversations, this is becoming more of a thing, trying to be more responsible in the things that we produce. How to do that within the constraints of a capitalist system is a very challenging thing, because we oftentimes we need to do that at the same time as we strive for more impact in the organizations we work with. So how do we transform those organizations? How do we work within those constraints? It's a very challenging thing for our discipline. Hopefully we could become better at that, but we need to change many things for that to happen. I think we need to be a bit more aware of power, of privilege, of a lot of conversations that oftentimes can be uncomfortable, but we need to have them if we want to challenge those very systems in which we operate within. I think there's another trend towards maybe dominant ways of doing design. There's a whole like decolonial criticism of our practice and how some of those established ways of doing things might be very pertinent, very okay for a particular context, but they are not necessarily universally relevant or to be applied in the exact same way across organizations and countries and cultures and the like. So maybe a bit more of a understanding of how people in different countries can do service design in different ways, and a more rich and diverse discipline. It's hopefully something that our discipline will move towards in the next 10 years. And the last one, it's the impact of technology and maybe AI in particular. Some other technologies are also having a disruptive impact, but in here probably AI is something that we need to consider. My talk at the Service Design Global Conference was particularly on this last bit, and to make a very small, short version of it. It has to do with, in a way, at an individual level, changing the way we work. This is the same for service designer and for every other discipline that will be transformed to some degree by technology, and how that will change, it's important. But also how the way services are consumed and delivered will change. The rise of AI agents, both inside and outside of organizations, synthetic agents being part of the services we consume, sometimes working on behalf of the user, sometimes working on behalf of our companies and other companies. This will reshape the way we think services in ways that we do not fully comprehend yet. We don't have the language maybe to talk about this. And then also how organizations will change. You know, the way the service design is a very organization looking or centered design discipline. We navigate organizations as part of what we do, and how organizations will change, or companies, governments, and everything will change, and their inner politics will change due to technology and the organizational legitimacy that we occupy within those organizations are going to be very relevant things. And the last one that for me is maybe my personal interest here has to do with how do we make more visible the impact that services have in other people than the user. There's this term I read not that long ago called like userism, like to think that the only important thing in a service, in a product, in an experience is the user, is something user-centered design has been afflicted by. So we need to start to think of the other people involved in these services. And as AI comes to the table, what I'm going here is how do we make the work that people do relevant, meaningful, and allow people to have a joyous life as technology automates part of the work that they do. And I think here service designers have the fundamental role to play into understanding what meaningful life or meaningful work is, and how can we redesign services and processes in such a way that they really respect the well-being and the dignity of everybody involved. That's $1 million question.
Yeah.
I think we need to move beyond very like black and white, kind of like dichotomic questions like will service designers be replaced and when, and more into how the service design practice be transformed, so like service designers or interaction designer, any kind of designer, any kind of role for that matter, will be transformed to some degree. So yes, there might be some cases in which we can squarely say that this whole industry will be disrupted, or this whole role will be transformed. Maybe people will be doing other things, but in particular for designers, I think it's much more interesting to think how will the role transform, how will it evolve, where do we deliver value to organizations, and how do we have also an active role in the shaping of our practice and of our discipline in order to go towards those places where the added value, the critical thinking, the analytical mindset, and the zoom in, zoom out perspective that service design has, how can we transform that to keep giving that value? Because otherwise we put ourselves in a very passive role of being automated or not. And I think it's much more productive to ask, what do we need to change? How do we need to move as a discipline to have a greater impact and to steer the world towards what we can roughly consider more desirable futures? So I think that's the more interesting conversation to have. No answers probably, but it's good to talk about it. Really good question. I think my career in service design it's a very, I think, typical career in the sense that I studied industrial design, then I did UX design, and then I moved over to service design. So it's a very like a lot of people have much more interesting ways of reaching the discipline of mine. But I think one thing that's very simple, yet I wish I had known sooner, is to not be afraid, like to understand that facilitation and working with other people is really part of the core of what I do. I think in the early part of my career, I was kind of like shying away from that part of it because I felt uncomfortable. It was outside of my comfort zone. So I had no problem like getting in contact with the users or doing research or prototype or a lot of other parts of what eventually became part of my portfolio of skills as a service designer. But I was not fully okay or comfortable enough to facilitate. And I think it took me a bit longer than maybe it took the time it took, and that's all right. But maybe if I could give an advice, is like, just don't be afraid to facilitate. Don't be yourself to put in a position to help other people think in collaborative ways. Eventually, I discovered that I liked it, but I was very afraid of putting myself in that position. And I think it's, at least for me, one of the most rewarding parts of being a service designer sometimes. In very concrete terms, I think what I'm trying to get with my talk on redefining design skills at the Service Design Global Conference is that AI, we need to start thinking of the impact of AI beyond current capabilities, and maybe not necessarily going as far as into some like dystopian future, but somewhere in the middle, there will be very concrete impacts that AI will have at an individual level, as a professional or as a worker, um, at an organizational level, and also at more societal levels. And this is something that came up in a panel afterwards, but basically, if we are not on the table, we are most likely on the menu. So these conversations are happening, these decisions are being um, are going around, and I think in general, as a practice, as a discipline, but also as a society, we should step up our level of understanding of the impacts of AI. And I think my talk is just my way of trying to get this conversation to a wider audience so that we can start having better quality conversations around the impacts that technology will have on everybody.